Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Thursday, February 9th, 2023 Ordinance Committee meeting. Liam, could you do the roll?
Sure. Councillor Katarina?
Here.
Councillor Seither?
Here.
Councillor McGee?
Here. Shown that as all present. Thank you very much. Next on the item for agenda is the approval of the minutes from the January 2023 meeting. Is there a motion to move that?
So moved. Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor? Show that is unanimous. Thank you. Item 4, discussion on marijuana ordinance terminology classifications of licenses. Liam.
Thank you. So I guess what we envisioned today was doing just giving a broad overview of the history of marijuana in Scarborough and try to identify some of the issues that we are contending with and talk about a path forward on this subject. So I think just again, some additional background, we've had marijuana in Scarborough going back at least 10 years in the form of cultivation. Back in 2018, Maine passed a law legalizing marijuana for both adult use and medical, and the town chose to opt into that program and allow for adult use and medical cultivation, testing, and manufacturing. So we do not allow retail stores in Scarborough. I think the things that I think the things for the ordinance that we want to talk about moving forward are a number of changes to our existing ordinance. I think we want to have some discussion in the future about some general housekeeping items, changing marijuana to cannabis. Just as a reference, the Office of Marijuana Policy has migrated and changed to the Office of Cannabis Policy. I think that we probably have some occasion to look at fees, our current fee structure, which have been in place now for 2 years. There's a number of other changes to the ordinance around documentation in terms of our local licensing process. We ask for a lot of documentation that's largely redundant or superfluous given what the state requires as they're a registered caregiver or under their adult use program. I think the biggest issue though here locally is we have a really need to look at our effective regulation, specifically of cultivation. I think it's very clear from our residents that we continue to have a challenge with effectively mitigating the odor at the property line, which is what the ordinance requires. And this is just, we are just flying through a number of complicated issues. For additional background, the town about 2 years ago did contract with an odor mitigation consultant. The product of that report, which really tried to identify the issue and the challenges of the issue, did generate changes to our ordinance with regard to what specifications we require for cultivation. And I think I've heard from advocates that Scarborough really has the most comprehensive odor mitigation standards in the state anyway, but it remains a challenge. And so really what I would, in addition, just again, I'm kind of jumping around. We also have some staff recommendations around our security system requirements. What the ordinance requires really is probably too much, and it's more than what we need, and it's really pragmatic. Of late, there's also been questions about zoning, again, primarily related to the underlying concern around odor. So I think we should revisit that. All of this is to say, I think there's a lot of work for this committee to accomplish. And what my recommendation would be for staff to convene a working group. I want to stop short of suggesting a formal committee, but a working group to bring the stakeholders here in Scarborough around a table to really work towards improving our existing ordinance. It's been 2 years now since we've really gotten into what technologies out there for the odor mitigation piece. I've heard anecdotally from even some local growers or cultivators that there's some UV lights, there's some other technologies that might go some way to chipping away at this. I think I really want to acknowledge and admit that we continue to have concerns and a problem with odor in Scarborough, specifically one area due to its proximity to a residential neighborhood. And I remain optimistic that we'll be able to make some inroads in that regard to find a mutually agreeable solution. So my recommendation would be to allow staff to convene a working group, perhaps with a representative of this committee. I know that Councillor Katerina was on the ground floor of this ordinance, but to bring back some recommendations even to this committee prior to going back to council.
Thanks. And for anyone at home or in the audience, really today is largely about trying to get our arms around what we might be in store for going forward. And how to best tackle some of those issues. I also don't think it's a bad idea. We've had this ordinance in place for almost 5 years to kind of reflect upon it and think about what's working for us and what is not working for us as a community. So I like the idea of a working group and bringing in, because I think there are definitely lots of sides to this. And I think having, somebody represent, the community, homeowners, the businesses themselves, and in a less formal process where they can kind of discuss some ideas and see if we can all get along somehow is not a bad path to take. That's my 2 cents on it. Don't know how you feel about it, but I'm open to the suggestion of a study group, so to speak.
I think it makes perfect sense to have a working group now that we've had feet on the ground at least for 2 years. Pretty detailed. Now we're finding out what works and doesn't work. And I'd be happy to serve on the working group if anyone thinks that makes sense, since I was involved way back when, and would be interested in seeing how we can fine tune this to make it work for all parties as best as possible. Because it is a sticky wicket right now in the state, and I'm looking at John. The state, I believe this year's taking up, or they've proposed some more changes to cannabis and whatnot. So, we're still playing that game, the state's up here doing whatever, which I keep an eye on with Legislative Policy Committee that I'm on with MMA. So I'd be happy to serve on a working group, and I do think it makes sense, and maybe we should talk between us and Liam about who we want to see on a working group.
So I guess that would be my question for us, which is do we want to recommend that the council try to piece together an action plan on a working group for this, or is this something that should come out of ordinance?
Yeah, I think the suggestion is staff's willing to convene that working group. I think just in terms of being efficient and our goal would be to be representative to really get the voices around a table. And I think it's a really good way for this committee to allow this group to do some work, come back to you with some hopefully results, and then you can report them up the chain. So it's really about time and efficiency. I think we can convene a group quite quickly as opposed to through a council process.
So my question would be, who would we like to see represented on this working group? And, off the top of my head, clearly somebody from ordinance, right? I would believe that somebody that represents 1 or 2 of the business owners that are engaging in this line of work. I think abutting neighborhoods from multiple areas in town. So even if you have an area that's not complaining about odor or whatever, there's gonna be an abutting neighborhood somewhere where hopefully we can engage a resident to show up and contribute their thoughts on either traffic volumes or odors or whatever. So kind of try to take that cross sampling.
Planning, someone from planning.
Someone from planning.
Okay.
She's like, I'm not busy enough.
Who, me?
So anyways, I guess I would want to know, how will we be comprised? Who's making up this working group?
Yeah, and herein is what we're trying to avoid is to get into a process of the council going through defining what it is, which isn't all that complicated, but then making selections. So if you're willing, I think staff's capable. We understand the sort of players that we need around the table to have a honest productive conversation. I would ask you to permit us to go down that road to see if we can produce some results. And all the territory you just covered is certainly stuff, areas that we've contemplated and would include.
How would we engage the public or notify the public that this would be ongoing?
Well, I think Liam has had any number of fairly consistent
was gonna
contacts
say
with a number of
Liam.
residents, particularly in the problem areas around odor. So that I think there's some clear guidance in that regard. To your suggestion of us reaching out and casting a wider net town-wide, that might be a little more challenging to identify interested parties. Again, the working group suggests that these are folks that have a keen interest in something tangible to offer, whether it's an experience or from a business perspective or from a budding resident. So it's really intended to be kind of efficient and focused.
What else will say is, I have had the occasion to speak to a number of the abutters, the concerned parties, and I understand their frustration. I applaud their patience. I've also had the occasion to speak with obviously lots of the players in the industry, and there really is a common objective here to be found. To a person, we have 50 or 60 licenses in one fashion or another. Everyone acknowledges that they want to be good neighbors. They want to be good partners. They don't want this to be a persistent issue. The most problematic facility, the ownership group there has always done everything we've asked them to do. And so I think there's a lot of will and good faith there. I think there's a common goal. And I think that people are really supportive of finding that. So I don't see this as, I don't see I don't see a contentious nature to this out of the gate. I think that we can all work and kind of the head towards the right direction. So I would be optimistic to see a group like this produce some meaningful results to be brought back to the committee. And I certainly think that letting us work to put that group together and either between now and the next meeting or at the next meeting, report out with where that stands and what the objectives would be.
And the working group would be public meetings, right? People can sit in and watch the group, or how would you do it?
I certainly think that, we could do, I think we're not looking to do it behind closed doors by any means,
Right.
but
I mean, you want to limit
Yeah.
people at the table, so to speak,
Right.
but at least people could follow or know and
yeah,
submit
there's nothing
somehow
secretive
or
about
other.
what the
Yeah.
discussions are.
Whatever
Let's-
comes out of the working group would end up right back here, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Again, another opportunity for anyone to comment
Right.
on it in its current form before it
Sure.
goes anywhere else.
Right.
Right.
Right. Yep. Very little risk to it, in my opinion.
Time frame on something like this?
Yeah, that's good.
I think it's become very clear that the problem that we thought we had improved still persists, and this is a longstanding problem. I think that we need to start really working towards some meaningful, impactful changes. So if we report out the next meeting, 60 to 90 days, something along those lines.
That sounds reasonable.
I was gonna say 90 days. I would suggest.
And we might get back to you sooner saying, listen, we can't move forward, so we need to find another path forward.
Mhm.
So we're just interested in trying this to see if it will produce some results.
Yeah, what if you gave it a max, said max 90 days? to report
Yeah, so
back?
just, I don't think anyone wants to linger. Just
No.
No.
Yeah.
Nor do we.
All right, so with the going theory of around 90 days, and we're gonna keep tabs on it, updates at the ordinance committee for how this is working out,
That'd be great.
maybe. And I do, and this is my mistake, this might actually help though in this situation, I do offer public comment at the start of each topic. So this one here, you've heard us discuss it, but I still want to leave it open for the public to kind of chime in any thoughts or feelings, so maybe what you've heard or suggestions. Podiums over there. Yeah, go on up. Just let us know your name and address and what's on your mind for this topic.
Joseph Kunkel from 12 Bickford Street. And I'm a scientist, but I'm not an engineer. And I think from the perspective of the neighborhoods, that we need someone who has engineering experience. And I know that Dave Rabideau is actually a growth engineer. He works with growing animals, but not plants. But in any event, he knows the concepts involved in the engineering of growth facilities. So I'm just, not that, I mean, I would propose his name if you were
As far as
entertaining,
suggestion was a participant in a working group possibly?
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
You got anything to say about that?
Usually that happens when the person's not present, so.
Yeah, yeah. My lucky day. Dave Rabideau, 10 Bickford Street in Scarborough. I'm an engineer, not a scientist, so I do work in the agriculture industry though. But I had something completely prepared. I think after hearing you discuss this, some of it's not worth even talking about. I just want to express that we are definitely interested in being a part of the solution. We have never once felt like we wanted to remove somebody's way of life or their job or anything. We would have always been happy not knowing that anything even existed around our house. That said, we were hoping to be part of the solution 2 years ago when we were talking about this in 2020. And I think our frustration is around the fact that we felt like nothing really happened with that. We followed the complaint system, over 100 complaints. To our knowledge, maybe there were discussions, but we have no evidence that anything ever happened. So we came to these meetings and we were very frustrated. And both my wife and I, Darlene, would love to be part of the solution. Either one or both. She speaks much better than I do, so she might be a better candidate, but thanks, appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Anyone else, any thoughts on this topic? All right. And just as a reminder, this is kind of a general discussion. We have a discussion on Holly and Beckford Street coming up after this.
I don't think I'm going to comment on that. My name is John Burke. I'm an attorney that represents cannabis businesses throughout the state. But I'm also a resident here. And I actually do in fact live near other cannabis facilities, but on the other side of town. I think one of the things that's really interesting, and I don't know if the Bickford Street and Holly Street families have had an opportunity to review that report, but if you haven't, you certainly should. There's a lot of science to this, I think, that we need to consider, and some due diligence and some investigating. One of the things that I would recommend, if we're going to have this workshop, which I think is a great idea, by the way, I would consider doing, having town staff kind of do random spot inspections, go to those neighbors' homes, stand in their backyard, document biometric pressure, which I think you can get that on your phone, temperature, time of day, things like that, because I do think that information is valuable, and especially valuable to an expert in the event that we decide to re-engage with that individual who did the initial analysis and see whether or not there's some other solutions. I do want to say, at least from what I've seen and experienced in this industry, is that they want to be good neighbors. They do not want to intrude on someone's ability to enjoy their backyard. The ones that I do know of definitely spend the time to mitigate their odor beyond what is required here, because they certainly don't want to have the issues that these neighbors have experiencing. Having said that, I think a workshop with the abutters is really important. Having professionals like the licensees at these meetings, I think, is also important, because they can at least express to you not only the odor concerns that we're talking about today, but other concerns with the ordinance, because there are others. And I think Liam did a nice job articulating that today. And, I certainly would attend these meetings to at least have a better understanding of the direction in which people are going. But I do live here too, and I've lived here for a long time. And I certainly don't want, I think we can come up with a reasonable ordinance that fixes or hopefully mitigates the concerns that the Bickford Holly Street families are having, but also addresses the concerns that these licensees are having, because they are serious. And I think, I just want to correct something in the record, though. Something that believe Liam said. 2016 is when the adult use legalization, the citizen initiative, it didn't go, it went through about 2 years of revisions until 2018. But the program didn't go live until 2020. And then for this particular ordinance, as Councilor Catarina can attest, we were here quite a bit in 2019, and then 2020, right before everything shut down, is when this particular ordinance was adopted. So either way, I'm always happy to answer any questions that this committee has, that any resident has, despite the fact that I represent these businesses. I will be honest and transparent. So thank you.
John, are you willing to be on the group?
Thank you.
Thank you. I would if so desired by the town staff. Thank you.
Any other public comment on this?
Darlene Smith, 10 Bickford Street, married to Dave Rabideau. I just want to agree that I think this workshop could be very beneficial for everybody, everybody involved. I'm a little bit standoffish with it only because we were asked to do the roundtable discussion, and we got so much great information from people from the other side of town, we're growers that participated as well, that don't seem to have this issue, yet our issue is so predominant, and the owner of the building was there, some lessees, some growers were there. And I just thought it was such a beneficial, promising beginning, but nothing ever came to fruition from it, so I just feel like I'm glad that it's a 90-day window that we're kind of looking at how best to solve the issues, or if the issues can be solved in that old building. So, but yes, we've all been provided copies way back. Liam was good enough to include us in 2020, 2021 with the Bowker and Associate. And, in a perfect world, this should work, right? So we're hoping that there's some kind of something will work to mitigate the odor. Thank you.
Thank you, darling. Any other public comment?
Hi, I'm Shelley Pelletier, 10 Snow Canning Road. I'm your neighbor. Hi, nice to meet you too. And I've always expressed that I want to be a friendly neighbor, a good neighbor. So I'm more than willing to work on the committee and to help take care of this problem, or at least find a solution to the problem where we can both live together and be happy. Okay.
Appreciate it. Any other public comment? Okay. If everyone's okay with this item, we'll move on to the next one. Which is yes,
All right, so we.
this was
Want
just,
to make it clear that we are giving the order to do a working group.
yeah, should we motion that one probably?
We can make a motion. I'm comfortable with staff taking this on, and it sounds like there's definitely some positive collaborative energy behind this. Jean Marie, if it works out that your schedule can't accommodate this, let me know and I
Okay.
can stand in as an alternate, but I think that this sounds like we have a pretty clear plan. So if you want to have a motion and make it formal.
So motion to direct staff to form a working group to report within 90 days-ish.
Second,
Any discussion? All in favor? Sure, that is unanimous. Thank you, everyone. Next item on tonight's agenda is discussion on Holly and Bickford Street. Liam, do you want to tee this up, or is Phil on deck?
I'll try, and I think that item 5 and item 6 are perhaps related as well, but just the brief background. A number of years ago, back in 2016, staff made an error in one of our GIS layers, which we've consistently relied on for understanding our zoning in town, and modified the Pine Point overlay, and the effect of that excluded a industrial park on Holly Street from that light industrial overlay. Just this past fall, that error was brought to staff's attention, and staff corrected the map to reflect the original council action dating back to 2012 with regard to the Pine Point overlay. Out of that discussion, I think Autumn will be prepared later on in the meeting to speak to changes to 405 that will include a more robust, comprehensive process for updating zoning maps to ensure that these oversights don't happen. But that is sort of the issue that brought this to a head.
So as far as our role here today, council asked us to take a look at this topic and this issue. And I think this is maybe where Phil jumps in a little bit, or is this more towards the zoning on the next topic?
Well, and I think a finer point and why this matter specifically was referred to this committee, there is a pending marijuana establishment at this location that I think is really the issue that the council had some concern for, and wanted the ordinance committee to have further conversation around.
It's 2 licenses, right?
There's one license that has gone to public hearing at council at the 10 Snow Canning Road facility for medical cultivation. The Holly Street parcel would be for a medical manufacturing license. Right now, the existing town council approved zoning would allow marijuana establishments in that facility. But just to be clear, that the license before the council does not include cultivation and does not have any odor concerns from staff based on the operation.
And that's Holly Street.
So I think we're on the same page in the understanding that council is expecting us to make a recommendation of some sort and send it back up their way.
Yeah, I think the matters are confused by the zoning map issue that is an important one that we need to, and we have a separate agenda item to speak to that. But I think that the real issue, as I understand it, has to do with the effect of that oversight and the confusion around whether marijuana establishments were permitted at that particular location or not. The answer from staff's perspective is they are. Having said that, the sitting council has the legal authority through your legislative process to modify zoning if you wish. So that's an option that I think, as I understand, the council wanted some further consideration around.
So let me ask this of my council members here. Should we flip this item around and do the zoning map? So we get a better understanding of the zoning
Sure.
prior to talking about it?
Makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
So now, Phil, you're definitely on deck. And Autumn.
So let me start, and then certainly Autumn and Phil can chime in. Liam gave me the introduction in terms of one instance. What we've done to really give ourselves, staff, a level of confidence that we understand what prior councils have done and what the official zoning match should reflect, because they should be obviously copacetic. We've actually gone back to 2002 and done a thorough research through the official meeting minutes, and luckily we had the same town clerk during the entire time and have extremely accurate meeting minutes, very helpful. And the point of that exercise is, one, to determine, are there any other oversights? And I expect there will be others. We're still in the process of doing that evaluation. The point of that is to get to the point of what I'll characterize as some degree of confidence that a map that we are looking at now properly reflects prior council actions. And then Autumn is prepared to talk about installing kind of from this fresh starting point, if you will, a codified process that will really ensure that this doesn't happen again, that we have got a process that ensures that when the council takes action, there's a requisite change in the zoning map in a timely basis, so we don't, again, find ourselves in the situation. We've certainly consulted with the town attorney throughout the last 10 days or so around this issue, and thought we'd make him available to the committee to the extent that you wanted his opinion as well.
Thank you. Autumn?
So,
Where you'd like to start, if you want to start with Phil on the specific zoning change and where that status lies as far as this property is concerned, or I can talk to you about a very broad overarching sort of moving forward path.
Yeah, I think what I would like to keep it, I mean, a lot of the people here in attendance today are probably mostly here to hear what Phil has to say and. for the-
Sure, yeah, I'm here really to answer questions, but Liam and Tom have summarized what I think is the right answer here. And that is, the Holly Street area is, from what I can see through the minutes, is in the TVC 4 and Industrial Overlay District, the Pine Point Overlay District. And that district allows certain marijuana establishments. So obviously the confusion, to back up, was when this was, and some of this I'm going to say really kind of reiterate what Liam went through, but just to lay it out. The council established the TBC 4 and the overlay district back in 2012, and that included, from what I can, the best I think everyone can tell, the area in question. And there were maps in the minutes, which is important and I think required, first of all. So the council needs to have, when you amend a map, you know what you're amending. So there's a picture of the map, it's specific. It's right there. So it's pretty clear. You can see it up close. I'm sure if you have it in your packet, that it was intended to include the end of Holly Street, where there's an existing industrial building. In 2014, there was an existing contract zone in that area. And in 2014, the council voted to repeal it. And that, so it was repealed through a vote, but from my understanding, it didn't come off the map for some time. And then when staff determined, oh, that layer's still on there, we need to take it off. Somehow inadvertently, when they took that layer out of the GIS, they also removed the zoning designation for that Holly Street portion. So it was a staff error, to be clear. That's had no legal impact from my perspective. Only the council has the authority to amend the map. Right, so it didn't show up, but there was no vote to ever amend it that way. So it has no legal impact. It does obviously have an impact in terms of what people see and expect, for sure. But there was no vote to take it out of the overlay district. Then in 2020, when the council adopted the marijuana amendments, it added certain allowed uses in the overlay district, marijuana establishments in the Pine Point overlay district. So it obviously included whatever areas were in those districts. The council did not at the time, and we've looked at the minutes, did not amend any kind of map. There was no map in the packet. In fact, Councilor Calorie knows, I was also assisting that your predecessors here in 2019 was in the room for a lot of it, with Councilor Hamel as well. And there was discussion at the time about whether the council would have wanted to go forward with an overlay district, sort of a marijuana establishment overlay district, instead of just inserting it as certain allowed uses in existing districts. But the decision was not to do that. So the decision was simply to determine what districts you thought it would be appropriate place, and to amend the text of the zoning ordinance, not the map. So that's what happened. That happened in 2020. So obviously there's some confusion now. But I think legally, from my perspective, there is no legal confusion. In other words, the zoning is what it is. It was voted in 2012, and the ordinance was amended in 2020. The ordinance, the text of the ordinance. So it appears that it still is in the overlay district, the Holly Street area, and the allowed uses in that area apply. The council, however, has options. Obviously, there's been some questions about, maybe certain councilors didn't understand that, because if you were looking at a map, if you're looking at a map and say, oh, where's this going to affect? Maybe in your mind, you would have voted differently, for example. So that's why there's an opportunity. It sounds like you may have a working group, and so that, or, maybe that's the correct venue to discuss where you may want these establishments. There's options too. For example, you may want to keep them there. You may not. If you don't want to keep them in the sort of Holly Street area, there's options. You can rezone it. You could create setbacks that would from residential districts, for example. That's one option. You can be a little more specific within a zoning district to say it's only allowed within the blank areas. So there's a number of different ways. And again, I don't want to predetermine whatever the council decides to do with those parcels, but there are ways to address it. And I think it's appropriate to think about it now if there really was a question about whether you wanted those kind of establishments to be allowed in the Holly Street area or not. So this is the time to talk about it and think about it. So I think that's where I am in terms of what it's currently zoned for. We can talk about the, existing applications, like, if you want to at a appropriate time, maybe when we come back with the end. Or now, or I mean, if we have specific questions about it. I'm happy to answer those now too.
I think I want to take up the licensing issue probably now.
I was gonna
Okay.
say, I feel like,
That's a good primer.
yeah, I
Right,
feel like
okay.
And I
the
would-
clarity around my questions is gonna get lost if we,
But do you-
if we push the discussion further. Nick, is it okay if I go?
Okay.
Nope, question.
Sure.
It's okay.
So,
Jean Marie.
oh, sorry. Grandfathering. So let's pretend.
Yeah.
That the council decides that they want to change all of this, but you've got all these businesses already licensed in there. What happens with them? I assume they get grandfathered because they were operating correctly under the rules as they existed at the time of their licensing.
So it's a little bit more complicated in the sense that you regulate these establishments through both zoning and licensing.
Right.
So there is a sort of legacy or grandfathering idea or provision under the zoning ordinance, but there is not for licensing. Licensing is an annual process,
Oh, yeah.
and you are not, you don't have the right to continue to get a license. So that's the difference between licensing and zoning, right? Land use.
Right.
That said, the council could decide to put some specific provision in your licensing ordinance that essentially allows existing licensees to continue under certain circumstances, for example, as long as that business is in place or whatever. We could come up with some language if that's the intent, if you end up changing the zoning. But you would have to address it directly in your licensing ordinance. Otherwise, no, there would be no protection going from my perspective for a business to continue to get a license if it's no longer allowed in the district.
Okay. I kind of asked another question. My other question, and it has to do with, to me, this is very interesting because it's sort of like in real estate. The deed, it's the deed. What does the deed say?
Right.
And in this, it sounds like, because I always tell clients, I don't care what the GIS looks like unless you've got it surveyed and according to the deed, this is what you own. So pulling that into here, so the legislative intent, so to speak, is that the right term to use? Back in whenever, 2012, and then moving forward, was that this Holly Street is part of what was included? Am I?
Yeah, and I'd say it's
Very
beyond
correctly.
legislative intent. Legislative intent is a
Okay.
concept when you're actually trying to figure out what people were
Okay.
thinking in their minds.
Yeah,
This is not that. This is actually, you have a
so I have an
thing that
actual.
we're voting on, so we can see what it was.
And that's where I'm getting confused because I keep hearing conversations with other counselors about, well, the map and the map controls, and I'm thinking, God, that's so weird to me because I've never lived by that, because maps can be wrong. Imagine that.
Yeah.
Look what's happened. So anyway.
Well,
that's
there is a
just
way, so you're right. So a map can be wrong, and so you have to look at, to the extent that there's a disagreement on what is mapped, I guess, I'm looking at this now and you can't see this, but it's not zoomed into a
Right.
level of detail, right? It typically zoning maps do follow property lines, not
Right.
always, but that's the typical default, I would say.
Yeah.
There is a process under your ordinance. If there is a dispute about the exact line, the Board of Appeals has jurisdiction to determine that. So under the zoning map provisions, that's what would happen. So if there's some dispute and you can't tell based on what the council did or looking at the map, the light's not clear enough, that's where you go. You go to the Board of Appeals, they have the jurisdiction to determine whether it's in the district or not.
I just
Okay.
want to make sure the committee appreciates that the Pine Point Overlay District includes the Snow Canning property and also this property at the end of Holly Street.
Right.
Okay.
And just to further clarify, that was made through the ordinance change, correct? Allowing that use in the TVC for zone.
In the
Is that-
Pine Point overlay zone
Yeah, in the Pine
specifically,
Point.
that's right,
Yeah.
in 2020. This is.
So Phil, then specifically, I thank you for laying out our options for the current zoning and things we could do. What do we do with the application that's currently in front of us? What are our options? First,
So
what's legal
Your
and
options
what's not,
are to process them as
of course.
under the existing ordinance. Or mean, I think the only other option is, and I'm gonna say this with no opinion, is a moratorium.
Mm.
Because otherwise I don't see that you would have really the authority to deny it if they meet all the other criteria. You couldn't deny it for zoning purposes, in my view,
Right.
at least, for that particular purpose. You couldn't deny it for that purpose. Councils do have the authority to enact a moratorium under state law. You've done it before in other circumstances. And you could have a moratorium on the processing and accepting of any applications. The main law court, it says you can make them retroactive to apply to pending applications. That's allowed. You have to use certain language. And I'll say most ordinances that I write do include that because quite frankly, moratorium often come up because there is
Pending
nothing in front of
applications
them.
trigger.
Whatever kind of
Yeah.
big project, you know,
Right.
you've seen in the solar, the wind,
Oh, yeah.
marijuana, and certain industry maybe comes to town and oftentimes it's because the towns, in fact, it's one of the reasons why you have to have, is that you don't think your ordinances are adequate to regulate it in a proper way. So that's what you would have to determine. Sometimes you have no ordinance, sometimes you do, and you do today, but you may have determined that it's inadequate. So you need some time. It's a pause. Moratorium is a pause. It's the other thing to remember about it. It's not a ongoing prohibition.
Right.
It's designed, it's a planning tool to allow you to take some time, but to think about it and then come back. And then actually then enact certain ordinances.
There's a legal limit on moratoria, right?
That's right. So if you go through your normal ordinance, it's an ordinance. If you go through your normal ordinance adoption process, the first one is for up to 180 days, and then
Okay.
you can extend it for an additional 180 days,
Okay.
potentially at least one more extension.
Or shorter period.
Or shorter period.
Right, but the
And then-
maximums, yeah.
The maximum.
Yeah.
Yep. If you, and you have under your charter an authority to have emergency ordinances by waiving the additional hearings. And I believe it is a 90-day. So if you do that with less
Mhm.
notice and hearing, you can do something within 90 days. So you'd have to, you could then extend it if you needed to by, going through the normal process.
And the moratorium is based on zoning or is based on type of application?
It's typically under land use.
Okay.
You regulate it both ways. So I think, if it was drafted, and I've drafted these before, you would have it apply to any type of permit approval license in the town of Scarborough.
And the reason I ask is because there is a distinction, correct me if I'm wrong, between the application that's pending at Snow Canning Road is a different type of application than the facility that's going in at Holly Street potentially.
Yeah.
Those
One's
are two
cultivation,
different-
one's
cultivation and
manufacturing.
one's
Yep.
manufacturing.
One of them is someone essentially acquiring an existing
Is a
operation as opposed to
transfer.
creating a new operation.
That's the
Correct. It does
canning.
not, my understanding is there's not an expansion of cultivation square footage associated with that new license. Yep,
That's the Snow Canning Road.
correct.
Okay.
Can I ask a question of Phil? With regard to, so you said that there's no legacy entitlement associated with licensing as opposed to zoning. So no kind of entitlement to ongoing licensing.
Right.
How does that apply with regard to caregiving and medical cultivation for establishments
Hmm.
that predate that state grandfathering date, or I guess maybe even after that?
So it does, there is a sort of grandfathering, and that's not the correct term to use anymore, but it's the easiest term to use, quite frankly. Legally non-conforming is technically the word, provision in the state law that allows establishments, I believe, operating with municipal approval prior to December 13th, 2018, if I remember correct, that they can continue to operate. Is what the state law says. And then since that time, since that grandfathering provision was put in, the legislature has adopted a definition of what operating with municipal approval means.
Mhm.
And because that was actually unknown, is it just a building permit? Is it, it's now defined as no, it's that you actually applied, essentially the town knew what you were applying for and gave you the approval to do that. So it couldn't be just like a general building permit and then you happen to run a marijuana establishment. Is
Mhm.
that you affirmatively asked to do something and you're given some sort of approval to do it. So that's the date.
So even if we were to sunset our licensing or remove, let's just be direct, the Pine Point overlay or somehow modify the Pine Point overlay with regard to its applicability for marijuana establishments, while there's no legacy entitlement or non-conforming use for with regard to the licensing, they would under zoning still maintain some legacy right to operate.
In my view, yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, establishments operating prior to that date, December 13th, 2018.
And that would still be the applicable date, even though we've certainly gone through our whole licensing process and relicensed new establishments after that date.
Yes. Now, I want to be clear, be careful, so you would still have, if you're just talking about zoning, land use approvals,
Mhm.
you would have, Scarborough-based grandfathering that could occur on the land use side. So if you, in other words, if an entity got an approval in 2021 through the planning board, they needed planning board approval,
Mhm.
and they're operating, and then you decide that that use is not allowed, they would still be legally non-conforming from a land use perspective in that area. They could continue to operate
Mhm.
as they were approved from the land use perspective. Now, the licensing is a different issue.
Okay, thank you.
Interesting.
Any more questions right now? Because I'd like to open it up for public comment on this. And then have a board
Mhm.
discussion. Anyone from the public want to comment on this topic?
Hi again, Dave Rabideau, 10 Bickford Street. I may have gotten lost in some of the conversation about maps and overlays. I have looked at the overlay map. It does indeed include the facility at the end of Holly Street. The approved marijuana cultivation map in the marijuana section on the town website does not include Holly Street. Includes nothing north of the train tracks. Brought this up once before. This is what we use when we originally came here to talk about this. In this situation, I think it's totally appropriate because we haven't had one mention of the residential areas. Holly Street and Bickford Street are residential areas. Number of families, number of small children. There are at least one, if not two houses on Bickford Street that are within 100 feet of the facility, the building. I'm not talking about property lines, I'm talking about building to building, less than 100 feet. This facility is entirely inappropriate for marijuana activity at all, regardless of the fact that this particular license has no odor attached to it. It does open the door to any other marijuana activity. So we, the residents of the area, are unabashedly opposed to this facility being a marijuana facility. Thanks.
Thank you.
John Burke, 16 Forecaster Way. I think it's kind of a question posed. And maybe wasn't following along with you, Liam. So under the medical statute, specifically, caregivers are protected entities. And they have a unique exception that a municipality may not prohibit or limit the number of them operating in a community. In the medical program, which is substantially different than the adult use program, you have a manufacturing license, but the state never actually created the license. So while it's in rules that it's a permitted activity, there is no exact manufacturing license. So instead, what caregivers are permitted to do, like dispensaries, which we don't have that license here in Scarborough, is they're allowed to cultivate under a restricted amount of plants or under a plant canopy. They're able to manufacture, except without using inherently hazardous substances. And they're allowed to have one retail store under their name, okay? So I guess the question I'm having, or some difficulty here, is that if they are a caregiver, and when we put a moratorium on caregivers operating here, aren't we in fact violating the state statute and limiting or prohibiting these caregivers from operating? In regard to the zoning, I don't really have a comment on that because I wasn't part of the 2012 debate and vote on it. But I think in workshop, I think it's an excellent discussion to have, to see, but I do think there's a problem here if we're telling someone, hey, you can't do this, and we put a moratorium in place. I could see another attorney getting involved and saying, wait a minute, this could be a potential issue. So just my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Joe Kunkel from 12 Bickford. With respect to the caregiver issue, I want everyone to be aware of the national attention given to pain clinics in which pain, of course, is something we would like to be able to alleviate. However, pain drugs have been misused and lines of people miles long, according to the news reports, have existed given a pain clinic opening and providing pain medication to people who are obviously more into recreational pain alleviation, the pain of life, I guess.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Barbara Kavanaugh, I live at 8 Bickford Street, my neighbors. I would just really, like last meeting, it was brought up that it could possibly be rezoned. So I would really be in support of rezoning so that we don't have a medical marijuana place in our neighborhood where we have kids and all the rest of us. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Darlene Smith, 10 Bickford. Like my husband was discussing, we have 5 immediate abutters that are all in residential zones. And we realize that Holly Street is cut in half. That half is the town TV, what is it called? TVC4 for future use. And in the meantime, the IO, the industrial overlay for Pine Point. I'm wondering I heard about the maps of 2012 and the 2016 revisions and such. I'm wondering, and Council Katarina might remember, in 2020, when this was all being discussed and where marijuana was actually good established areas that would be, were you looking at the overlay including Holly Street, or was it just considered the map that we're all looking at? Because if the decision was based on the map we're all currently looking at and not including Holly Street, it seems like that would be an easy fix to say, well, our intention in 2020 was to have it down in industrial, with the industrial. And it's not, the end of Holly Street is not an industrial park. It's a business park. It's, we have Stuart Smith Photography. We have a beautiful florist shop there. We have Arcadia Kitchen Design, and we have None Such Oyster. So it's all wholesome 8 to 5 businesses that I just don't feel this fits into the business park. Number one, it doesn't fit into the residential zone. Number two, and the last ordinance meeting I watched, it was discussed the RF and the RFM zone, the last ordinance meeting. And it was determined in the rural farm and rural farm manufacturing housing zone that it was too residential. You've got homes too close together and it could be an impingement on a residence. This is far too close together. I mean, we share, Holly Street is cut down the middle, half resident and half this IO overlay, which I understand they had to do probably to create that opportunity for industry at the end of the road. However, I want you to be mindful that we're residents with tiny little 0.2 acre lots in Pine Point. And when we bought our house, it was not with the intention of having this type of industry going on. So, you know, with the Snow Canning Road aside, and we're just talking Holly Street, Bickford Street, I would hope that the ordinance council committee would have the same mentality as they did for rural farming and just say, absolutely not, it's way too close. I mean, and if it means, you know, like the attorney had suggested setbacks as far as building to building, how, you know, possibly that's something that should be looked at. I mean, there's all different types of ways of doing this, but I just think it's just way too tight of a neighborhood and too smaller lots to be trying to squeeze this in. So thank you.
Thank you.
Would it be helpful? I mean, I guess what I would say is that, you know, not all marijuana establishments are kind of created equal, right? And so would it be helpful for the council to have more information about this specific, since it's this kind of this specific license that you're weighing in on? It would be helpful to have more information about the specific operation.
So I think, hold that thought for right now. I want to wrap up public comment and then kind of jump into some of those particulars. Is there anyone else here that'd like to speak on this?
Allison had her hand up, but I don't see it up now. Oh, there
Hey,
it is.
Allison.
Allison, you should be able to speak.
She's
You just need to unmute yourself.
Allison, if you can hear us, you're muted right now.
She's had this issue before.
Has she?
Something to do with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's the last public comment that I can see though.
Sorry.
Allison, when you have figured it out, send a message in that little chat. Does she have the chat functionality?
No,
No, you can't do that on that end for viewing.
No.
she can text
All right.
someone.
Okay, Allison, did you figure it out? No. All right, send us an email, Allison. All right, with that, I'll close public comment. So in my mind, we've got really two things here. We have a license application for snow canning, and it's a replacement of an existing facility, correct? Or existing operation. It's transferring,
It's cultivation.
correct? And then we have another license request pending for the end of Holly Street. And that is for a manufacturing. that is
Medical
not-
manufacturing.
And that is
license.
not a grow or a canopy situation.
Correct.
So we have two different licenses, and I want to ask the council members here whether or not we should take up those two items just separately. So a recommendation can be made to the full council, or do you view this as a package deal? Because I feel like one, if we go down the road of a zoning, possible recommending a zoning change to go to council for Holly Street or that part of the business park there, that impacts one of these licenses, not necessarily the other. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
And so if we separate the two and take them up individually, I don't know if that's a better way to approach this.
I know I have some thoughts about what's in front of us, and then if that helps.
Shoot, you got it.
So I'm conflicted. Imagine that, having worked on this whole thing. I'm definitely separating cultivation from manufacturing as far as an odor issue. I'm just looking at it purely from a purely odor as an issue. Forget any of the societal things with, we don't want marijuana, whatever, near kids and what, just leave that alone at the moment. And I feel very strongly that if you're a business person and you're trying to do a business and you're following all the rules, to have the rug pulled out underneath you at the last minute's not a good thing either. So part of me is like, if I were queen of the world right now, and I like to use that frequently, and I'm not, some days I wish I were, I would definitely say, my opinion is that I would say, look, let the two licenses move forward, those applications, but let's put a moratorium on what we're doing here and do a deeper dive, which is part of what this work group is doing, to report back to the council. And my advice to the council would be, let these licenses move forward. They've been operating under good faith, under rules that, you know, are expected. And then we'll take another look at, you know, what we should be doing here as a bigger picture. But that's just my opinion right now, just where I'm at.
Yours is advise the council that these two, you would advise us to send these back up to the.
Yeah,
council.
oh, definitely it's gotta go back to council. Yeah,
Okay, in their current
yeah.
form. with their
Yeah,
current request
and
form.
I would make the argument that let these licensees move forward, because they've put a lot of work and whatever, and they've been playing by the rules. And that's it. And that one that's already current for Holly, you know, if he or she's making, you know, doing everything they're supposed to be doing and meets all the criteria for licensing as is occurring now, then, you know, let that happen. But we need to really be looking at what are we doing over there. That's my opinion.
April.
I guess I still have some more questions about moratorium, maybe before I wrap my head around what recommendation I would make to council. So what does that mean for the people? We're putting a moratorium on approving new licenses.
Yeah.
So people would continue to operate their businesses as they are right now. And so really the moratorium would affect these two that are on the table right now, and then anyone who may have an application that we haven't seen yet,
That's
right?
right. And as Councilor Katarina says, it doesn't have to apply. So the general, the default rule is that ordinances do not apply to pending applications, and pending applications mean applications that have had at least one substantive review, so a public hearing and some sort of review, something beyond a completeness review. If that's the general rule under Maine law.
Can you say
But-
that again? Sorry.
So the general rule is that ordinances are forward-looking. In other
Okay.
words, you're not gonna go back and grab something. That's the general rule, but you can override the general rule. And you have to be specific about it in your ordinance, and it's called a retroactivity clause.
Okay.
And a lot of moratoria use a retroactivity.
Yeah.
It's a frequently used thing, as I said. So what you have to say is, notwithstanding that statute that says it's forward-looking, notwithstanding it, we're going to apply this to pending applications. That's the way you would do it. And there's a lot of things in between. So I've seen a lot of things in between, which is I've seen some councils in other contexts say, we're going to have this retroactive. However, it does not apply to any applications that had been filed with the office as of X date, right? And I've heard some of the same reasons of council that for the reasons to do it that way. So there's some flexibility on how you want to apply to any existing applications.
Okay.
But in my view, if you want to, you have the authority to apply it to applications that are still pending.
Okay.
If it helps, Counselor, you could also extend it to cover other situations. So I think you referenced new applications. You could even have it apply to expansion of
Renewals?
existing.
Expansion,
So
okay.
there's a way to broaden it, beyond just new applications as well.
And what is this committee's thinking in terms of how long that moratorium is in place? Do we have would we establish a set of benchmarks that would trigger the end of it? Like what are the conditions that would need to be met for us to say, okay, moratorium's over now?
I would suspect that the work group
Yeah.
would have to have produced a product that has to
Okay.
go through ordinance that would then go through council.
Okay, and so my concern about that being the sequence of events is that in my mind, this really is two very separate applications in the sense that, like it or not, Snow Canning Road is operating with a number of licensed businesses there, and we're all acknowledging that there are some issues there with it being so close to a residential neighborhood. And so we've said, okay, let's put a work group in place to discuss some mitigation and further improve that situation for our residents. I think that's great. To me, the Holly Street application is separate. I'm not sure that sending that through the same work group is necessarily going to tie together very well. Because of the nature of the application, that it's manufacturing and not growing. And so I think I don't know, maybe I have two different recommendations to council. I'm with Counselor Katerina in that the pending applications, have followed all the rules. They've done what they need to do. They're allowable uses. I understand the frustration over the incorrect maps. I would be just as angry if I lived there too and come to find out this was an allowable use all along. I think we have had it explained to us pretty clearly now that the intent of that map was always to allow this as a use, and it's really unfortunate that that wrong map was posted to our website and that's the information that you all had access to. So all that said, I don't know if I support putting a moratorium in place before approving the pending applications or not. And I agree that this needs to go back to council. I think it's going to be a challenge to explain our options and kind of tie up this conversation, sending it back to council without a very clear recommendation coming out of this committee. And so
Maybe we make
we
this
can
required
continue to
watching.
discuss. Yeah. I just think,
Tell them to watch this meeting before they vote.
I don't know. I'm curious to hear your thoughts, Counselor McGee.
Once in a while, I have thoughts. Well, Liam, quick question on the Holly Street item, the manufacturing. Do they occupy the space yet?
I believe they have, I guess I would ask if the applicant, prospective applicant is in attendance this evening.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if it might be helpful and in their interest to answer some of these questions. Would that be agreeable? My understanding is that they do have a lease on the space, yes.
So I guess that's kind of my question,
Yeah.
which is having a license, what do you must have a physical address associated with that license? Is that part of this?
Mhm.
So the license is really pending upon an address that is approved for the use, right?
They cannot begin operation without a local license.
Well,
Yes.
without a location. right?
Nor would
We
we
wouldn't,
process a license without it
that's what I'm asking.
residing in a
Right.
area that allows that use.
So just so everyone's kind of following along where I'm trying to go with all of this, here's my thought process. The Snow Canning Road application in general, they're already a building full of cultivators and growers. I personally feel like they're already there. I think the work group hopefully will address some of these odor mitigation issues. Actually, I think it was the other licenses pending on Holly Street that mentioned maybe a dual filtration system they were trying out. And
That was the Snow Canning Road facility.
So
Yeah,
that's
the one
Snow
who
Canning.
spoke. Yeah.
I would love to learn more. I think that should be
Yeah.
part of the work group study is like,
Yeah.
maybe that should be part of the requirement, then make a dual cleansing type of deal.
Mhm.
So in any case, I do view the Snow Canning facility a little differently than Holly Street. In the sense that if it was my neighborhood, I'm really kind of coming down with the residents on this one, which is maybe this doesn't make the odor, but it could make the traffic, or it could open the door for other types of facilities in that one building. And whether or not we should, as a council, not necessarily as an ordinance group, as a council, consider that before voting on whether or not that license goes forward, is whether or not that Holly Street building really is an appropriate place to have the zoning sit. Should it be taken out of that zone?
So that's another question then that I have is if we allow this license because it is pending, and I understand moratorium is often triggered by, an issue just like this, a pending license. If we approve the licenses that are pending right now, does that change our options in terms of if we decide to do a zoning change, or, because you were saying I don't want to let the business operate and say, you know what, as of right now, everything is all in a line and you've done what you need to do, and then have this go to full council and have full council say, I don't think this ever should have been an allowable use. And now we're gonna rip the rug out from under anyone who may have thought that they were gonna have their business there. And so I'm just trying to be fair to everybody here and make sure that we have this discussion so that everybody understands that the implications and the options at each stop.
So the question, I think, and I think I heard it from some of the residents as well, is if the council permits the Holly Street license, does that open the door for other establishments, specifically, I think, cultivation, to also move into that facility? And I think the moratorium would, in the short term, prevent that. And the larger conversation around whether that parcel should be zoned or continue to allow marijuana establishments, I think is, if I'm hearing Phil correctly, that's something that is on the table. Whether that's by removing that property from the overlay, whether that's dealing with setbacks. I think there are other ways to, is that fair, Phil?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But does that, sorry,
No,
but does
please.
that include the current application or not?
It could, it depends.
Like the moratorium,
It could,
we
the
could
moratorium
grant-
could include this current pending application or not.
Yeah.
If you didn't include it, the moratorium would effectively say no more
Yeah.
for the 90 days. And if the council ultimately decided that they didn't want to permit future marijuana establishments in that Holly Street neighborhood, it sounds like there would be the ability to say even existing licensed entities kind of get out, right? Is that being
That's right.
bold enough?
You'd have to, if under the hypothetical you just said, so say you granted the license for the Holly Street residents, you put a moratorium in place, council decides we don't want these there anymore, so that you remove it from the land use table. From a land use perspective, there was no licensing requirement in the town, they would be grandfathered, so they can continue operating.
Yeah.
But because you have a license and that's an annual requirement, what you'd have to do, if you did want to continue to let that one, is to have something in your provision that say, like, licensees existing as of this date may continue. You'd have to proactively address your concern, because otherwise there would be a risk that they would lose the ability to operate under the licensing ordinance.
thank you, perfect. We've gotten right to where I was trying to drive at, not very articulately, clearly, because it was a long windy road, but so now to go back to Jean Marie's point, I agree with her fundamentally that these businesses' applications are correct and should probably be allowed. But I have a strong sense that when the council has a look at that Holly Street facility, that and myself included, are going to be leaning away from allowing that use to happen there. And so I don't think it's fair for me to say that I would support the license going in prior to a moratorium in that facility, only knowing that once this goes to the full council, there's a potential that we would not allow that to be a use in that facility anymore.
Thanks, April.
Tom has.
Well, I was just going to clarify, Councilor Seiler, you made a point earlier about the distinction between the working group and the sort of subject area that they intend to cover, as opposed to the policy, the kind of land use decision, and they are separate and distinct. And I don't think the work group has really much interest or business in the land use conversation. My only point is there can be parallel processes with different review bodies, presumably this committee or the full council on the land use, while the working group is doing its piece, and they can kind of come together at the end of the moratorium period. So simple point I'm trying to make is that the moratorium period, that pause, will give it's an opportunity for all of these things to be considered, and you can consider them in different ways.
Okay, so all that being said, then I think I've landed on my recommendation, or, my stance on all of this would be to recommend a moratorium and not allow the pending applications to be processed prior to that moratorium being in place,
Both applications?
both applications.
Jean Marie?
No, you heard me. I said, send it to council with the advice that they approve both or consider it. I would leave the piece on whether approving the license is up to the council.
Yeah, just appreciate that.
Yeah.
The decision on the different license applications are separate and distinct.
Right.
The council as a body will act on those. I think without knowing the particulars, the town attorney did mention that you need to have some legal basis for denial of
Yes.
such a license. So just to be clear, it's a separate and distinct vote, but
Right.
what we know is there's not likely to be reasons that you would say no to the license.
Sorry, can I go back now? Because now I have another question. And I apologize if I'm tying everybody into knots, but so do we have to act on the licenses before we put a moratorium in place? Because my impression was that we did not.
No. No,
No.
in fact, you wouldn't act.
You wouldn't act. So I'm not saying that we would deny the licenses. Because I understand that there's not really a reason to do so.
You wouldn't be, if you acted before the moratorium, you would be left with your existing ordinances to apply. And that's what I
Right.
think
Right.
Tom was saying. So you'd have to apply it, and if they met the standards, then you would approve it.
Okay,
Then you do
And
the
if you enacted a moratorium first, then that is the standard you would apply, and you'd say you would prohibit yourself from processing those applications.
okay.
There does seem to be a difference, and again, I'm not taking an opinion on this necessarily, but there does seem to be a difference between the two in the sense that one of the operations, from my understanding, I haven't reviewed the applications myself, but one of the applications is for an existing business
Right.
that's already operating, but they need a new license because there's a change in ownership. Right, so that it's a little bit different in the sense that even though, from what I understand, you're saying you may want to apply to both, but it typically a moratorium wouldn't apply in that way because moratorium would stop a business from operating. In other words, starting up new
Yeah.
or expanding.
Okay.
That's typically how that's used.
Okay,
Whereas I
so,
think if you were to do what you were to do, you would potentially stop an existing business from continuing to operate.
okay, and that's important to understand. Thank you, because my prior understanding of something you said, Phil, was that frequently moratoriums go in place because they're triggered by an issue. And I think we all acknowledged the issue at Snow Canning Road. And so so wouldn't that be an allowable?
Certainly, is the difference.
I think, are you just telling us that the consequences? of
Well,
that would
yeah,
be
and the
that their
difference is,
business
I think
would
it
be
is
lower?
unusual.
Right.
I will say in my experience, that it is unusual to have a moratorium applied to a business that's already operating because of some mechanism that you have in place, like a license. Typically, it's used when they're really only having land use related approvals that are required. So that's why. So in other words, it wouldn't apply to existing business. They already have their approval.
Okay,
Right? In this case, you do have a licensing requirement. I do think you can apply a moratorium to the licensing, one of the approvals. It's just something for you to consider. It's already operating. What they need a new license from what I understand. Again, I'm talking a little bit outside my depth because I haven't seen it, but they need a new license because there was a change in ownership and that triggers the need for a new license. So it's not that they're operating a new business that it might.
Yeah, I think you're right. Just a further distinction, because we have a separate licensing requirement.
Mhm.
And the working group hopefully will come up with some additional required measures for odor mitigation and others perhaps. There will be future ongoing opportunities to ensure and require compliance with new up-to-date regulations. So to the extent that we modify those and improve those, that existing business would have to comply with whatever the new rules are at the time of license renewal. So there's an ongoing opportunity, even with the grandfather status, if you will, to improve operations.
That's right. That's one of the sort of benefits, if you will, of a licensing requirement. Is that it requires continual compliance with rules that change from year to year.
Mhm.
So if I could, I'm going to try to offer up a suggestion for a recommendation from this committee. So I would propose that we offer up to the council to consider a moratorium
Yeah.
on new licenses. However, I would also recommend that we propose that the two licensees and their applications be taken up for full council vote. And whether they're dispensed of through a licensing, affirmative licensing, or whether they're caught up in the moratorium. That would be the council decision.
But we have to make it clear, am I correct? And I'm looking at the
Mhm.
attorney. That the moratorium doesn't start until after the license decisions have been made. Is that correct? Or do they get caught up in?
Sounds, and
What I'm-
see if I understand what you're saying. You actually want each to be brought up on their merits and the council votes them up or down.
Correct, including moratorium as a separate issue as well. Separate all three questions and have the votes. That's my recommendation
You
that
can
we
do
would
that.
make to the council.
Yeah, you can do that.
Okay.
And as long as, so there's two ways of doing that. I'm not trying to complicate, I'm trying to.
Oh, hold on, I'm gonna complicate it, Phil,
I'm
so
gonna
go for
try to
it.
simplify it for you, But if that's the way you want to
We're
go,
gonna
so
vote
the
on the snow canning one. And
the
then we're gonna
first
go to
way to do
moratorium.
it is to take up the application
Right.
before you
Yeah.
get to the moratorium
Yes.
votes. So, right, so then you're applying the existing
Yes.
standards and it's, you vote on them.
Mhm.
Okay.
Then you have a moratorium going forward.
Yeah. That's what I
Um,
would-
the second way, same result. The second way is you could enact a moratorium, but not have it applied to pending
Oh,
applications.
right.
And again, so now you're still voting on the existing
Mhm.
regulations for those particular.
That's like splitting the baby.
It doesn't matter. You'll just, I just want to make clear you understand that that's what it means, is that you'd be voting under the existing regulations. And that's fine.
Correct.
That's fine.
Just as opposed to where it is or constructed, you can find them action, but the licenses would be here before the new ordinance.
Right.
Which the moratorium shape is, or it's probably worth.
Mhm.
So you
Tom,
don't have to
your
decide
mic on.
Sorry, just by virtue of the way you, your agendas are constructed, licenses will be, they appear first, so they'd be considered first on your agenda. An emergency ordinance to impose a moratorium would appear after that.
Unless we make a motion to move the agenda around.
That's right. You can modify the agenda to switch the schedule.
Just for clarity, and Counselor Snyder might have the same question. Could you vote on one and not on the other? And then make only one be applicable to the moratorium?
I assume you could.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Little
that's
odd,
my
little
exact
odd.
question. Thank you, Autumn.
That was kind of where I was going with it. You vote on one,
I-
take up the moratorium and then.
And let's not pull punches here. I mean, we're talking about voting on snow canning, because it fits
Well,
the
our, I'm
business
saying
and.
our recommendation to the council is that we take those three issues up separately.
But the bottom
And
line
But
is-
I'm concerned that when this goes to the full council, we've an hour deep here.
Mhm.
And I have been really, giving this my all here to ask all my questions, to make sure that I'm being clear, to see this from all sides. I see this going sideways so quickly at full council. I just want to make sure that we don't, and that's not a knock on anybody. This is really complicated. I just want to make sure that whatever recommendation comes out of council or out of this committee rather, that even if we don't agree or don't need to decide tonight, to your point, Jean Marie, that we lay out the path very clearly for council. And I think so my feeling would be if there was an intent to vote on snow canning, then potentially put a moratorium in place, which would apply to the Holly Street application, that attempting to modify that agenda on the fly and explain the rationale behind doing that could be very challenging at the full council level.
So if that's the intent, couldn't the moratorium be worded in such a way that would be clear what it's applicable and what it isn't to? You could,
Right.
separate.
We
the
shouldn't
two
act on the
applications.
Holly Street
by
license
date.
first, though.
Yeah, we could. We have to think about how they would word that, but yeah.
Rather than going through the machinations of adjusting agendas and doing one thing before the other, I think the moratorium could be worded to affect what your what your wish is.
So I'm just, from my perspective as a
Which might not be
subcommittee
everyone's
chair,
wish.
I'm trying to get us three to make a recommendation to the town council. That's what I was hoping to get out of this. Well, so there's one of two things we could do here, which is we can send the snow canning license up with a recommendation as we ought to think it passes or not, right? Or we can leave it with no recommendation,
Yeah,
still send it up.
I wouldn't recommend you make a recommendation
Yeah,
whether a
that's-
license should be acted on or not. It's just
Right.
whether it's on for
Right.
consideration.
And that's why I'm saying we really should be just sending the moratorium, the
Yes.
recommendation for a moratorium, and that we recommend that the council take up the two licenses separately as a topic of discussion.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of where we've landed. We're not deciding anything here, are we? I mean, they kicked it back down to us for a recommendation, and our recommendation is put a moratorium in place. We'll establish a work study group,
Right,
which we're doing here,
yes.
and we think
And
those
then
two
maybe
licensees
just
should be taken
Deal
up
with
separately
their license.
Right.
Deal with the
and
license.
tell the council that they gotta take a vote.
So I guess just in the interest of collecting as much information as possible, is there any interest in hearing more from the Holly Street applicant at this time? Answering questions about, I've heard questions or concerns about the application. If there's no value, then
The only thing I would say about that is that that owner is going to have to defend their licensing in front of the full council. I'm not sure defending it in front of the body of three of us that are going to recommend that the full council vote on it is going to help unless they really want to talk. If they, unless you'd like to offer something, I mean, I'm more than happy to. It's a public meeting and, you know, we welcome those comments. I know it's probably uncomfortable to hear us talk about it so flippantly and there's no face attached to it, but there is a face attached to it. And I don't mind hearing, you know, what you have. If you could just go to the podium and use it. Sure. And just to refresh, the members council here do remember you making a sales pitch at the last one. However, if you want to give a quick summary of where it is and what you're doing for anyone at home that's watching for the first time.
Of course, yeah. So my name is Evan Musage, the owner of Alpine Cannabis Company, which is at the Holly Street location. Do you want me to maybe do a little bit of a backstory of how we've gone through this process? Would that be? Yeah.
High level.
Yeah. 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 So we actually started this and took the lease on this over 6 months ago. It's been a pretty long process. Put thousands of dollars of my own money into it since then. Just received the CO. I think on this was about a month ago now. And yeah, some of the things that were set up here previously, and Liam mentioned too, this is a really low impact business. I've worked in the cannabis industry for a couple of years. I actually do compliance consulting for a bunch of different businesses and work with a lot of different towns. It's an 800 square foot unit. It's mostly for candy making. That's it. It's mostly based off of using hot plates. That's pretty much the entirety of it. So it's going to have like a really low impact. You know, when we started the process, we were really under the impression that, you know, it was okay to move through with this. And if we hadn't, like, if we had known, obviously, like I've done applications to Wyndham, through Oxford, Portland, and even in town of Scarborough and another facility. If we knew that this was going to cause like such a big issue, you know, definitely wouldn't have probably gone through with a lot of it since then. Through communication with the town, you know, and you know, into the residents too, like we didn't know that there was such an issue with the snow canning facility. Like that was the odor issue. Like we, you know, didn't have any idea that was an issue there. But yeah, you know, obviously I probably wouldn't have gone through this whole process. But yeah, again, from the residents and from you guys, I'm happy to answer any questions you guys have about the facility, about the process that we went through to get here. And yeah, open door for that.
Appreciate you.
Yeah.
Speaking with us.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Oh, no,
Yeah.
Phil, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I just, and Tom knows this, I have to leave at 5:30 for another evening meeting. I do have one suggestion actually, is that you can also, it'll help offline in terms of drafting any potential. You can also have a moratorium apply to particular uses, just to give you that option. So in other words, it doesn't have to be in particular parts of town. You've got a lot of, so in other words, if the issue is, and I don't know, maybe it's more broad, if the issue is cultivation in that particular facility, you could have a moratorium on medical marijuana cultivation facilities as that's described in your ordinance from there, but allow manufacturing, for example, during the moratorium period. So that's just, I just want to say that's an option. It doesn't have to be a just blanket sledgehammer approach.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
and I apologize for having to leave, but any follow-up questions I'll get from Liam, Tom.
Thanks, Phil. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Phil.
Yeah, I just want to say also to everybody, I appreciate the confusion that there is with the caregivers. Like it kind of does the way that it works. It even allows like a retail element to work with patients and things like that. So that's at the town level, it's kind of encompasses a lot of different things. When I became a caregiver, I had to approve myself for a certain amount of plants, even though I have I don't even know how to grow them. I have no intention of growing them. So I have like the minimum amount, for example. And it does allow all these different things. But it's, yeah, it's kind of all bunched into one with the state program, unfortunately.
So
Thank-
can you speak a little bit to your impact, perceived or not, in this building for the residents? Like,
Of course.
will you have people coming and going? You know, are you anticipating increased traffic? Are your operating hours within normal business hours? I don't know if these are, I mean, are these okay questions to,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to grill
I've actually,
you.
yeah, since starting this project, before I was working in Scarborough, so I actually picked up a full-time job. It'd probably be maybe open for a day or two a week, honestly, being used at that amount. And it is purely manufacturing. There will be no patients coming in. There will be probably 2 people at the place at one time. That's it. Yeah, that's all. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I think my recommendation for what we recommend, it still stands. I think we asked the council to take up the 2 licenses separate, as well as consider the use of a moratorium. And then inform them of the intent to have the work group start working for 90 days. Leaving us not offering any opinion as to the validity or the use that would be there, but have the full council vote on it. Does that seem like?
I agree.
Takes a little time sometimes, doesn't it, April, depending on the topic?
Thank you for everybody.
Yes, thank you very much for all of you participating today. All right.
I have to make a quick return.
Oh,
Just on
Do you need a 5-minute break?
2 minutes would be fine. I just
We are going
have
to
the
take
red
take a 3-minute break. Aye, I could call us back into session.
I got my best school.
All right, so now we are on to item number 6, the discussion on the process of updating the zoning maps.
Okay, thank you.
Autumn,
So when this came up last fall, we did put into place a policy between myself, the zoning administrator, who's Brian Longstaff, then Monica Warnock, the GIS administrator, and then Tony Justice, the town clerk. So we all came up with this process so that we didn't have these issues going forward. After some time, we also decided that we should probably look to codify some of these issues and some of these topics and to address the zoning administration title. And so I think that you all received the policy and then the actual ordinance proposal. Some of the ordinance proposal is just a really clarifying some of the map applicability and then giving the town clerk the testing authority as to its final authority, giving some time limits as to when GIS updates map changes. But one thing I think that's a big change that I am very much in favor of is beginning all zoning changes at the planning department. Because in the past, they have begun in different places, and I think that may be some of the disconnect. And so the policy, if they start, no matter who they're initiated through town council, planning board, staff finds an error, or a resident wants to, if we process them in-house, we will start the map process with our GIS. We will complete the process with our GIS. And so that mapping will stay the same. We'll make sure we have really accurate data surveys. And so that's the bulk of the changes, I think. And so our goal, Tom mentioned, we're doing this 20-year look back. That's the beginning of our electronic system for mapping. And we're going to make sure that we've captured all of those changes. And if we haven't, we will bring those forward to council, have a discussion as to our plans moving forward, how to correct the physical map for those town actions. And then going forward, hopefully putting these changes into process so we have a positive feel that we won't have this issue come up again. That will take the possibility for this human error and this kind of this group not talking to this group not happening again. So that's what's in front of you. It's pretty simple, some changes. I gave the red lines just so you could see how it was moved around, which sometimes it's hard to see, but I can answer any questions, or I would urge you just take a look at it and see if there's anything that doesn't make sense or you'd like us to add to. It's pretty easy fix.
and any follow-up from staff? All right, so this item is open for public discussion. If anyone has anything they'd like to ask or speak on. Anyone online? No? All right, I'm going to close public comment. Councilors? I'll say this. So for the discussion on how to update these zoning maps, the process and whatnot, how would you say this aligns with maybe what other communities have been doing? Or are we, how does this stack up?
I think it's pretty much the same
It is.
way. And especially if we change the way we process them from the beginning, we'll be in good shape compared to other places.
I did.
Yeah.
Great work. Now we gotta digest it.
Do you see any harm in delaying this until our next ordinance meeting while we digest and?
Do not see any harm in digesting it, although I do have a large ordinance that will be coming forward hopefully in March as well. So I know there are some things. So just warning.
So yeah.
What do you think about just a referral? I mean, I think there's enough interest in the broader council on this issue, the process. I mean, I think the suggested process, I think, is pretty benign, clearly an improvement on the existing process that we have, which is lacking detail. So maybe just a referral to council without a recommendation one way or the other. I hope it would be.
I'll move that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the broader council is gonna.
We know that the broader council has interest in this process.
Sure.
And so I think what Autumn has here is clear and we can all read it and knowing that it's going to be on an upcoming full council agenda, use that opportunity to weigh in on any suggestions or changes. I don't think that this needs to come with a recommendation out of this committee, and I don't necessarily see there being a whole lot of benefit of keeping it at the committee level right now.
And technically, they would refer it to us anyways if they needed to.
It'll come back.
It will come back. You think so? I don't know. I suspect
Maybe
this might.
not.
Yeah, I was to say, I expect a tweak or two maybe on the fly might happen. I would be surprised to see it come back here. But I've always been wrong. So I'm wrong before. Okay, yeah, I'm fine with sending this over. Thank you for doing that legwork and appreciate it. Any other questions on this topic before we close out of it? Oh. Oh.
Yeah, I move
To send it to the. full
Move to council.
Second,
I have a motion, a second discussion. All in favor? That's all of us moving to council. Thank you, Tracy. Discussion on motel hotel conversions.
Ooh,
That is Autumn 2.
Yes.
this was my baby.
And I have a PowerPoint for this one. So when I came on board, this was information that was passed on.
Yeah, did she come? You want to take a pocket?
Oh,
We'll know where to find you if you steal it. I know where to find you.
I'm gonna zip it up.
Thank you.
Bye.
so if you'll go to the first slide, there is a map, and the Housing Alliance put together a list of all of the hotels and motels in Scarborough, and there's 20 properties that they identified. That group did all of the legwork for this, really. They put together this list, they looked at the zoning for the different groups, and then they discussed what they thought should come forward. And the next slide shows the recap of their findings. And so they wrote this memo to town council in August, and this is what I inherited, if you will, to try to help them create an ordinance. And so they identified these 3 general areas for the properties. You have the coastal with the 9 properties, the Route 1 corridor. The Route 1 corridor, there's 5 properties, and then the Payne Road corridor, there were 5 properties. They had 7 zoning districts identified. The Housing Alliance recommended streamlining the process to the B2, B3, TVC, and TVC3. And then they recommended a conditional use or a special exception process. The next slide. When I looked at these zoning districts, so the B2, there's 5 properties. Those are your Payne Road properties. Multifamily is not permitted. The B3 multifamily is not permitted, but the one property they identified in TVC and then TVC3, you could actually have multifamily permitted. So it was actually a use that could do something. So when I came back, the next slide, my recommendations, well, this is just a zoomed in look of what these different groups look like. Sorry, this one is the Payne Road. So this is the focus of the recommendations, the B2 group. So there's 5. I'm sure you're all pretty familiar with these, where they're located, but these are the 5 that are zone B2, but currently can't, multifamily is not an allowed use. So next slide. And then, like I mentioned, the ones that are in bold, number 16, 1, 7, and 8, they're actually could already convert to multifamily by right with the zoning that's in place. They would have to do some building permits things, but they do have that zoning in place. So the staff recommendation was to really focus on those 5 in Payne Road. So the next slide. Talks about the Housing Alliance recommendations for performance standards. Some of those included affordable housing, workforce housing, that they wanted to make sure that the market rate and the affordable housing looked the same. So there wasn't a lower end in the development. The GMO wouldn't apply as long as they stayed within their same hotel number. So I took these recommendations and created the ordinance. I think you all have the attachments. So the proposed ordinance amendments would only apply to the group 1, B2, and then the language would add multifamily as a special exception only in B2, and then it would add performance standards for the special exception. So the next slide shows the specific language in red. And so in the zoning district itself, it would say multifamily dwellings converted from lodging uses in existence as of January 1, 2023, subject to the performance standards of section 9Z of this ordinance. So this would be only allowed in B2 as a special exception if it existed last month and it had to go through the special exception process. So it's a pretty tight window of how you get there, but the possibility in lot is created for conversion. The next one talks about the summary of what you have to do to get a special exception. So it's the Zoning Board of Appeals. And the Zoning Board of Appeals meets outside of the planning board. They have their own purview and authority. But they have specific requirements that everything has to get a special exception. They have to do with traffic, neighborhood compatibility, stormwater. So they have these standard requirements, and that's what's before you. And then the next slide shows you the specific, and this is included in the ordinance language, shows you the specific performance standards that would just apply to this multifamily conversion. So some of the ones that are probably more interesting are the residential units must be self-contained. They have to be independent living quarters, including the kitchen, bath, and sleeping space for each unit. Accessibility requirements should be considered. A minimum of 50% of all units must qualify as renter occupied workforce housing, renter occupied affordable housing units, and deed restricted. And then a minimum of 10% of all units must qualify as renter occupied affordable housing units as defined by the zoning ordinance and deed restricted. So you need, it's not an easy thing to get there. It has to have some intent to meet some requirements for this. And the next slide shows the rest of the performance standards. So amenities have to be considered, adequate parking has to be considered. And I added the yellow just for information. It's always the next question, how many parking spaces are required for, so I always include that. And then also there's an exemption from the rate of growth ordinance as long as the number of units stays the same. So if they have a 12-unit hotel, motel, and they convert into 12 units, it wouldn't apply. That wouldn't apply towards the rate of growth ordinance. And then minor modifications to the site can be done without the site plan process, but anything over disturbing 100 square feet has to go. So there's another step. So you'd have to get your special exception, and then you'd have to go to the planning board for site plan approval. Next slide. And that just tells you special exception approval, meet all the standards, meet these standards for these conversions. And then maybe site plan approval at planning board, and then you go on to your building permit process for any internal electrical, plumbing, that sort of work. We do, I think this is a good attempt to address the desire. It's very specific. It's very sort of narrow in its approach to these 5 applicable multifamily residents. I would say that if it was something that was successful and positive, it'd be easily applied to other districts as the council saw fit. It's written in that way, so we could apply it to other areas. I will tell you, since this inception, I do have a hotel that has gone through a sketch plan through planning board, and I have another hotel that is trying to do a preload. So it's interesting to get new hotel interest in, as well as perhaps this sort of conversion interest. So just putting that out there for full disclosure. So I can answer any questions.
I'm gonna offer public comment and then we'll get to council comments. Anyone here from the public? Seeing none, I'll close public comment. I'm gonna take a stab at this real quick. Theoretically, we have one of those buildings decides to convert, would you say to apartments most likely, or condos?
Apartments.
Most likely apartments.
They have to be
It'd be
apartments. They have to be rented.
Before rent.
Okay, so my next question is how do we avoid a situation like the Comfort Inn? So if I now have an apartment building and I end up in a state program, and what I've effectively done is I now no longer have a license requirement. I could take advantage of some housing programs. And we end up with a Comfort Inn, but no authority to pull a license.
Excuse me. Can I speak?
Sure, I didn't know you were waiting.
This is my baby, okay?
So
This
I guess
This whole thing.
my hypothetical, like, is what
I know.
is
Let me-
stopping that from happening?
Well, nothing, and why should it? But that's, I'm not going down there. Let me just give you some
Trying.
background on this.
Yeah.
Just give you some background on this. The Candlewood Suites, came to the council, I want to say 2 years ago, maybe? Was it your first meeting? Was it 2 years ago? I lose track of time. Doesn't matter. So they had a buyer who wanted to convert, and he does this for a business, convert to apartments, and the council shot it down, and I was really perturbed, but that's because I'm known around here as Ms. Workforce Housing, because I know, as an economic development issue, there is no housing for people with workforce. And I'm not even talking about the affordable, which I think you're leaning towards. Workforce housing being, if I remember correctly, 80 to 120% of the whatever HUD number is, which is actually a higher income level than you'd expect, but it's people who are in the workforce who right now are commuting an hour and a half, 2 hours to work in the Portland area. So I was like, oh, this sounds like such a cool idea, and why don't we jump on it? Now, the affordable housing piece, you notice it's 10% affordable housing, and then minimum 50%. I don't remember the affordable or workforce on them, but that being said, the focus of this is really more towards workforce, not so-called affordable housing. But there's nothing wrong with affordable housing either. People need a place to live.
No, I guess I guess my concern was, is there anything that would prevent that situation? Because what I know from the Comfort Inn experience is our real authority came within the licensing procedure. And if we're taking that out of the equation and you now have a private landlord
Yeah.
that is doing this, it could happen anywhere, but
Right.
are we creating the potential for another situation like that?
I
Or is there a way to address it while still accomplishing what you're looking to do?
don't. That's a good question. I think that it's,
I have a question.
yeah, let her ask her question
Well,
while I calm down.
it's in line with what you just said. Can we impose minimum lease terms? Isn't that something that we talked about with the Candlewood, that we had said, like, if we were gonna let Candlewood during their conversion process,
yeah.
like, wasn't part of their application was that they would require a 12-month lease?
Yes.
So there might be some.
Right, that's what I'm asking. Like, is there
Yeah.
a way
Oh,
to
yeah,
put
yeah.
ourselves in,
Okay.
avoid that situation?
Yes, you could put in, and I would recommend that,
Mhm.
because you don't want these being short-term rentals either. You don't want some
Correct.
rich people from wherever coming up and renting 6 months to live here, and
We don't
in
have to hate
Florida
rich people
6
too.
months.
I mean.
I don't.
Okay.
But I'm
It's
just
okay
saying,
that they
I'm
wanna
trying
come
to.
here and spend their money.
Class.
Right, and I appreciate that. I want to avoid the Comfort Inn situation.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, no, I
whether
get it.
there's language.
No,
we
it wouldn't be,
develop or-
yeah, I mean, you could require that, but yeah, no, so it's a turnover.
Correct, yeah.
That I will agree with you on that. I just
So-
have to pick on you.
No, it's fine.
So I would definitely want to confirm that we can
Yeah, you
enact
can- we
some
can
kind
make
of
that.
Sure, and then
lease term agreements.
are you hearing most of this would probably be apartments, or do you think it would move to a condo?
I think it would just be apartments.
Has to be
apartments
apartments.
rental.
Yeah.
By the way it's written.
I think you can do 10% affordable housing in condos. I think that problem is they have trouble selling.
Yes,
With
yeah,
that
it becomes the
devious restriction.
economics, it
Right.
becomes the economics of it, because we talked about that at length
Mhm.
at affordable housing. I just think that it would be awesome for Scarborough to do this, or at least offer this opportunity. I think we could be a leader in this.
Can I ask because sounds like you're both there, you were still feeling your way around, it sounds like, but. So if that failed, what caused it to fail, out of curiosity?
What the owner did a terrible job of selling it, to be honest with you. And I actually got him hooked up with someone who could help him with PR and get his act together. Not the owner, excuse me, the buyer, the potential buyer. But there were concerns about traffic and this and that, but it didn't get the send off wasn't right. It wasn't, the groundwork wasn't done. He just sort of came in and said, I want to do this type of thing. But I feel like if we do this groundwork, we put things in that say, you know, minimum 12 months, you know, or whatever, because you can do that type of thing with this type of housing. It just offers an opportunity that is needed as an economic development engine for this area. These would go so fast
Oh, sure.
to workforce, forget
Mhm.
affordable, just
Right.
workforce. You know, people who work in the restaurants or in the stores, or the young woman that I met with at TD Bank the other day, she commutes an hour and a half from outside of Lewiston, Auburn. She can't afford anything around here. You know, so.
Nick, I can speak to, I think, too, because I voted against it. And so I think some of my concerns were around traffic, specifically with Candlewood. You know, would there be impacts of the fact that they were going to be within the school board ordinance for not being able to take a school bus? And so in the event that any children did live there, they would have to cross Payne Road. And so we had, like, there were some logistics behind that specific hotel that raised some real concerns, and none of this groundwork had been laid. And so it
Right.
was more just, it was a kind of one-off. They were coming to us with a proposal to make the conversion. And I really felt like there was a lot of uncertainty and unknown surrounding that request at the time. So I think that if that helps with
Yeah, I'm
maybe a
just trying to
little
want to
bit
get
of
a feel
context,
why it
sure.
maybe didn't work the first time around.
Sure,
Some of that public comment you may have received.
yeah, and the business owners around that hotel did come and speak against the conversion, because it is an upscale furniture store, and there are some other businesses there that, you know, the zone had not allowed long-term affordable housing in that parking, in that shared parking lot. And there was a lot of discussion about who was maintaining the parking lot and all those kinds of things. And so there was definitely some neighbor logistics happening there too, and some concerns that we
And that
heard.
was prior to, then things devolved at Candlewood from that point. So I think you find the owners of some of these places will have changed their mind somewhat, looking for a more stable type of situation than what's currently going on there.
You might,
And not to pick on just Candlewood. I
right,
mean,
yeah, no, that I
obviously
only give that as the example
Right.
because that one did
That's the only
literally
one
come
we
before
had,
council, yeah. No, my question or hesitation, I guess, around this would just be, it's a potential of 472 units. That would be exempt from the GMO,
Mhm.
that, that's not without impact.
Correct.
And so if at the committee level, we're ready to make a recommendation that this go to the full council, I don't know what other action or input, Autumn, maybe you were looking for, but
I guess my question, it doesn't have to be exempt from the GMO. I mean, is it something that you?
Well, the other thing you have to remember is this is just allowing for this use potentially to happen. It's still got to go through all these different steps. And there's your performance standards and whatnot.
Sure.
I think personally, and from my discussions with the guys who know more than I do about affordable housing or on a housing alliance, they're members of the group. And they work with workforce housing and development a lot in different states. The thing with taking away the GMO thing, it's more of an incentive. It's an incentive for someone to want to step up to the plate to do this. The good news is hopefully Scarborough will have a new school sometime in the next not too distant future. So we'll have a little bit more capacity. If you look at the size of the units, most of them they're gonna be single people or couples, perhaps. There's not a lot of room for kids, a lot of kids. But there you go. But it is an opportunity. That's my plug for at least moving it to council so that it can be discussed.
I guess my follow-up question is, has public safety had a chance to look at this or weigh in on it?
Well, when it goes to council, then we start the process.
That's my question is what happens now?
Goes to
So
council.
this goes to council and it goes to council as a,
To be vetted by 7 people. As opposed to 3.
Wait, where are they gonna send it back here?
yeah.
Well, not if I named it. Well, they may, but they shouldn't, because it's already been around. It's been with the 4. I'm just asking them to go to council. Let's get it in front of council. Let's see what they think.
And I would be happy to vet it with public safety in
Yeah.
the
Sure.
interim.
I think
too,
it would
if
help
that's-
to, even as it gets on a council agenda, to have
Yeah.
maybe their opinions of it, or maybe their concerns,
Sure.
or maybe language they would
Like to
feel
see
more
it.
comfortable with.
Completely agree. Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
That's fine.
I'm comfortable with it going to council with a little bit more homework from Autumn.
Yep.
She said the other day she was bored and didn't have enough to do.
Certainly.
I hear that from her almost every time I talk.
Good news is she just bought a house, so she's stuck
Now
with
you're
it.
stuck.
Job security. I cleared that first.
All right, so is there a motion to move this on to council?
Oh,
for
baby,
Further
yes,
consideration.
please.
Second.
A motion and a second, any discussion? All in favor? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank
Sure
you.
that is
Thank you.
unanimous. Thank you very much. And I have us at the witching hour of 6 p.m. Which means we are going to, unless you wave your hands around and say this cannot wait another month.
Oh, fuel cell.
Fuel cell. I want to table that till next month's meeting, if that is okay with the spirit.
It is a request from an applicant. But it's okay with me.
How time sensitive is it? You have another meeting. or
Yeah.
something, so.
That's okay. I am.
I have until 6:30.
Don't have a present.
Fly out of here at 6:30.
It's a really pretty simple change. It's not my area of expertise at all. But it's up to you guys.
So perhaps the person who's requesting it could explain it to us. No, the applicant.
I did not invite them to
Okay.
come to this. That's why I included their PowerPoint in here. They went to sustainability and explained it to
They
that
did.
group.
Yeah, it's been to
It's been
sustainability.
through
yeah.
sustainability and staff worked with sustainability to add the language. That was it.
Again, this is something that's gotta go through the whole council process, so. It's change in performance standards, basically, right?
It is. It's just opening up a new usage. We have
Yeah.
a limiting
Yeah.
verbiage that we don't even track as a town that would not allow them to go in. It's just a secondary power source.
I've never heard of them before.
It's,
but
it's
we'll
an
learn.
interesting sustainability. It's not great. It's not perfect, but it's not bad. It's sort of solar wind, but it's in a box. And we
Solar
had a
wind in
couple of users
box.
request it, and that's my very technical explanation of it, but
I think it would be nice to invite the people here
Okay.
to explain some of this technology and what it is they're trying
Okay.
to accomplish with there. So I will entertain a motion to table this till next meeting.
But, okay, no discussion. So,
Yes, there's a.
no, you can't discuss tabling
Oh, that's right.
parliamentary
Keep talking,
procedure,
and
man.
I will withdraw my teeth.
Well, I just, my only other request would maybe be that, since this did go through sustainability, that we, let Jamie and the sustainability committee know when this is gonna be on the
Oh, they-
ordinance agenda.
they do know. I'm
Okay.
just processing it.
It
for
was
them.
today, it was right now.
Well, right, but if we table it, I would just like them to get the
Yes,
updated
I'll let 'em
information that
I
that
think-
it's being tabled.
I think when we're a little fresher, we're going past 2 hours on this, so. I
Okay.
think when we're a little fresher, we can jump in.
I think you're already
With you
plenty
young
fresh.
guys.
I gotta tell you, so, this is the benefit of having spent years in the planning board, and you would do those 3 to 4, 5 hour-long meetings, you would realize that the quality of your questions went down the more time you had been in the room, so. right. So I don't want to, I want to stay crisp and fresh.
So I we move this to our next ordinance meeting, which is whatever the date is.
Yes,
March 9th.
it was second there, April,
Yes, second.
all in favor. All right, we'll see that on the agenda next time around. Thank you, Autumn. Item 9 is the next agenda items. We'll continue to talk about that and just put out draft agenda and then have you guys look at it and see if there's anything else that needs to show up.
Yep.
I want to thank everyone for participating this evening, coming out. It really is good to hear from people and see some interest in what we're doing. So, anyone have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Sure, that is unanimous. Thank you very much. And thank you for coming out.
Thanks, everybody.